Bulldogs and Stingray are coming for you. This is Stephen Ray, a.k.a. Stingray, coming to you live from Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Good afternoon, Mr. Feinbaum. Stingray here, and I'm about to shoot the bull with you like all the Auburn students do down at Auburn. Worst defense ever! So without further ado, here is the biggest Alabama going for the field goal. The kick is up. It is away. It is no good. Chris Davis bringing it out of the end zone. Oh, he's got blockers. Chris Davis up the sideline. Here he goes. Here we go, guys. Dobbs back to pass. Launching the ball. Jennings, he's got it. Jennings, he's got it. Touchdown, Tennessee. They shocked the Dogs in Sanford Stadium. Are you kidding me? My God almighty. What an epic way for the Tennessee-Georgia rivalry to end this game. What a play. Wow. Another exciting edition of the Stingray Show. Everybody, I am your host, Stephen Ray, and we have a huge guest on the show today as we're going to have the one and only Timmy B on the show. But before we get to my special guest today, let me go on ahead and pull up my co-host, Heath Hopkins. How are you doing today, sir?
Steven, I'm doing wonderful. How about you, my friend?
I'm doing good. And on this episode, we're going to talk with Timmy B about a lot of sports. We're going to talk with him about college football, college basketball that just wrapped up a few weeks ago, and then, of course, college baseball, as we are getting oh so close to the SEC tournament and then eventually the regionals.
Yeah, Timmy B just got off the road. He's been at a very busy basketball season, slightly complicated with the global pandemic. They had to work through some things in different states and different things, but I'm always here for the Timmy B stories.
Yes. So without further ado, let me just go on ahead real quick. And first off, let me just go ahead and ask real quick, Heath, what is your most fondest memory of Timmy B?
Oh, wow. That's actually a good question. You know what? I was going to ask Tim about this in the show. I would like to bring up I cannot remember the year. I want to say 2004. Mr. Brando called a very intense basketball game that decided the SEC with Mississippi State and Alabama. And I believe it was Timmy Bowers in a free throw situation. And Coleman Coliseum came unglued. It came apart. That was some shenanigans by Timmy Bowers and Rick Stansbury and the Bulldogs that day. I just wanted to get his feedback from it because I don't think anyone's doubting there were shenanigans that happened.
Yes. Well, here is one of his most exciting calls from this past year in college basketball, and then we will get to Mr. Tim Brando.
Wrap around, over to Scruggs on the wing. There's a ball fake. Out deep. Jones! Colby Jones with the tray. He delivers with .1 remaining. The kid from Mountain Brook, Alabama. Hello. How do you do? Wow.
So, without further ado, here is our very special guest, Tim Brando. Timmy B, how do you do, sir?
I am doing just fine. It's good to be with you guys. How are you?
Doing good.
Wonderful. And Tim, is this Chateau Brando?
Yes, you're seeing the chateau in all its glory. There she is. That's the Ted Turner Jane Fonda pool that we were able to build when I did the NBA playoffs. And inside the NBA, that may be a little bit of a nugget for you guys. You've heard probably that I was the initial host of College Game Day, but did you also know that I was the first host of the original Inside the NBA? Because I was. Actually, it's a little bit of a fudge because in the early days of Inside the NBA, CNN did it. It was Fred Hickman, Nick Charles, and those guys that used to do CNN Sports Tonight. And then in 1996, that particular summer, spring and summer, I had done the Hawks and I'd done some NBA play-by-play after I left ESPN with Turner. And I was also doing Atlanta Braves games back then. And I got a call from the late Mike Pearl. Jim just passed away a few months ago. Great executive, multi. He helped put together not only the NFL Today with Brent Musburger. He was the line producer for the original NFL Today. But he also helped out with really Monday Night Football and what you see on Sunday Night Football at NBC, reshaping what they did. Anyway, he was in charge of Turner at that time. And they had said that CNN was not going to be involved anymore with any of the studio programming for the NBA. David Stern, really the commissioner of the league, wanted them to do a lot more with it, make it a show that was capable of having conversation with fans at the end of the night. And it was a bizarre setting. I'd never done a studio show like that. And they would bring in guys that were knocked out of the playoffs, like George Karl was coaching the Sonics. They got beat by the Denver Nuggets, you might recall, and George came into work. Jimmy Jackson was still playing for the Dallas Mavericks, and he came into work with me. And the show didn't start until after the last playoff game, which was usually a West Coast game. So it was about 1:30 Eastern time when we came on the air. And I didn't get back to my hotel until about 3, but I stayed in Buckhead that entire late spring and all the way through the summer to the NBA championship series started, because we went all the way up to either the Eastern or Western Conference Finals.
Right.
Ernie Johnson was doing the pregame and he was doing the halftimes, but they couldn't have him up and they couldn't have him working until 3:00 in the morning.
Right.
So I did the late night wrap-up show, which went way into the wee hours of the night. And that was not originally in my contract, so they had to pony up and got some extra cash, and that's how we got the pool built. So we called that the Ted and Jane pool here at the Chateau.
Now, Tim, any fun Ted Turner stories you can share with us?
Well, that was a great group of people to work for, and it was and they still are, basically. I mean, a lot of the older guys that worked behind the scenes are still there, and the creativity was magnificent, and they wanted to make it interactive. Like, I had never thought about being in a studio show for television and taking calls from people, but they wanted to do that. Hey, it's Scott in Sandy Springs. And I mean, what was Barkley thinking there when he passed it back out? He wasn't being double teamed. What was he? That kind of stuff. It was great. I'll tell you what was really fun was seeing the lifestyles so closely of so many guys that I had known, had covered, coaches like George Karl, John Daly, the great Pistons coach.
Right.
Rodman came into town once. We're all staying in Buckhead. And Craig Sager, God rest his soul, Craig was just the best. I mean, and he knew everybody. He was one of those insiders that had great relationships with literally everybody. He on speed dial, he could get a hold of Rodman. All right. And Rodman's coming into town, and the Spurs had been knocked out. He was playing for San Antonio. Spurs got knocked out. Rodman comes into town while Daly is in working with me, and Sager sets it up so we're not off the air till at least 2:15, 2:20, but there were places still open, and Craig knew where they were. And I'm in a limo with John Daly, Dennis Rodman, and Craig Sager in Buckhead outside Atlanta. And I remember we went into this place, and about 30 minutes into it, I said, gosh, fellas, I think I'm pretty cool, but this isn't my scene. I think I've got a 10 o'clock tea time tomorrow. We could play golf until about 3 or 4 in the afternoon because I didn't have to go on the air till like 12:30, 1 o'clock at night.
Right.
So I got out of there. but it was just amazing the people that you'd meet and the kind of relationships that we had that we were able to cultivate because of where we were, the point in time in our lives where we were. And there were some great stories. Remember Dick Verdace?
Yeah.
Wild white hair. He used to coach at Bradley, coached some in the NBA. He worked for Chuck Daly. And Versace, as we called him, was a fun-loving guy. And he was cut from that old Jersey Hubie Brown cloth of college basketball. He came up through the college ranks with all those guys, Jimmy Lynam, and I learned so much basketball and so much personality from the game of basketball from being with those guys. And I was still working a lot of college basketball in the SEC during those days. I was working at Turner, but I was also doing the Jefferson Pilot SEC football games, the Jefferson Pilot SEC and ACC basketball games. So I was a busy guy. I joke that we built this pool, but I only saw pictures of it for a long time. I was working so much with the combination of the NFL, the college football, the NBA, and Major League Baseball. I was working year round in those days. Some guys, I watch them, these guys that are out there like Adam Amin and Joe Davis, who work with me at Fox, and they are working around the clock just like I used to. And I know what that's like, and it's fun. And it's wonderful, but I got to tell you, at this stage of my life, where I just got my Medicare card, I'm really happy to have this downtime right now and watch those guys while I recharge my battery for football and basketball.
Well, I've got a couple of questions about this past basketball tournament, and the first one is this. Were you surprised, I think it was a couple of weeks ago now, that Roy Williams retired from North Carolina?
No.
Okay.
And no, not at all. And I don't know how much longer Coach K will hang around either. These guys are going through real difficult times and have been for the last 2 or 3 years, maybe longer. I think for K, I don't know that people realize, back in the mid-'90s, after he won the 2 national titles in 91 and 92, Mike Krzyzewski saw the many problems that college basketball was having. He understood the issues that were coming down the pike.
Yes.
He anticipated this whole one-and-done thing with the NBA. And even though he embraced it, and he had to embrace it after he got together with USA Basketball and worked with Jerry Colangelo, none of his teams recently look at all like those teams that he had, in the 80s and 90s. The foundation of the Duke program was built on pounding the floor and D'ing up and getting up under the chin of the offensive player, not allowing the teams to run their offense. Well, I mean, you look out there the last few years, even the teams that included Zion Williamson didn't really want to play defense. They just outscored you. He adapted because he had to. He had to adapt. But he wanted very badly to get the NCAA to understand that massive changes were going to be needed in order to save college basketball's regular season. Well, I think you've seen what's happened. College basketball's regular season has been really contracted to such a point where it's almost not covered at all, except by those of us that are out there doing the games. If you're watching any of the news shows, it's on the last segment of SportsCenter. If you're watching any of the daytime shows that are embrace debate shows, even on FS1 where I work, they're not talking about college basketball during the regular season. I mean, at all. And yet when they go off the air, what's on? College basketball. Yes. So it's lost its juice. Right. And Mike wanted to preserve it, and he went before the NCAA in their major meetings and hearings, and several of the chancellors basically, and the people, the presidents, people that were highly involved, they laughed him right out of the room.
Right.
He couldn't get their attention. And it was shortly after that, you remember he had the back problems and he actually missed a season. Pete Godet, his assistant, took over in 1995. Mike always wanted a commissioner for college basketball. He felt that the NCAA and the NCAA men's basketball tournament provided so much revenue to the NCAA that they should protect the property. And they needed a basketball person in charge of just that, because it's a $1 billion business now. It was a multi-million-dollar business then. And he wanted to protect the product, and he really felt they should do that. And they really never did. So guys like Roy Williams and Mike Krzyzewski that have gone through all of these changes, and they are 10 years older than I am. Okay, we're talking, Roy's probably, 71, 72, so he's maybe 7 years older than me. Mike, I think, is 74, 75, right. About to turn 75. That's 10 years older than me. They've seen these two trains on the same track about to hit and hitting and crashing. They've seen this for 2 decades. Right. And they wanted to try to be part of the solution, but the NCAA, in its infinite wisdom, just said, you know what, you guys coach, we'll take care of the rest of it. They should have listened to them. And I think Roy and Mike both just said, well, okay, if you can't beat them, join them. We'll just adapt, do what we have to do to win. And to their credit, both of them have won multiple national championships with these changes that are there that they don't necessarily like. Right. But over time, it'll drive any coach out of their minds. Any coach. Yeah. But the payday is so big, fellas, that for a while there you'll do it. But once you've made what they've made, and you've coached and you've helped as many young men as they've helped, you get to a point where it's like, okay, do I really want to continue doing this with these situations, these circumstances, with the transfer portal the way it is now, with the wild, wild west taking place every year, and I'm supposedly responsible for everything that goes on with this program, and frankly, my position has been diminished. You know, the coaching profession has been diminished, especially in college basketball, because of the way the rules are set up and the way they're interpreted. College football coaches are beginning to feel it, but college basketball coaches have been feeling it for feeling it hard for at least the last 20 years.
Tim, I wanted to ask you about Coach K. I've always said he is nothing but Bobby Knight Jr., but yet Bobby Knight has always been viewed as a villain by the media, and Coach K's always been loved by the media. We know that Coach K played under Bobby Knight. Are those two guys basically the same guy as far as a coach?
No, they're not. I think there are a lot of Coach K haters that want to project that feeling. I don't think you're one of them, but you may not like him.
I don't have any beef with Coach K.
My guess is you're not a fan. But I know the man. I know him really well. And he is the genuine article. He really does. I think what he did, to your point about the technical end of college basketball, as it relates to covering all the ground, all the territory, and being a hands-on, teacher of college basketball, yes, there are striking similarities. Yes, Mike will say many, 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 many things that a lot of other coaches cannot say.
Right.
But Mike does it with sartorial splendor, and he learned from watching Knight that if you're bombastic and you're animated when you're dressing down an official, okay, then you're going to get tossed. So Mike maintains this sort of John Wooden-esque look along the sidelines while he's absolutely undressing a lot of officials during the course of the game. And his coaching staff is really good about staying on top of what's going on with his team because they're all former players. I mean, the last coach that he had that wasn't a former player was Mike Bray, who's now been at Notre Dame for 20 plus years. So, these guys get their marching orders, and there is a fear factor. So to the point that you're making about Knight, does he motivate through fear? Yeah, to a point. But the problem is today's player, particularly one that is a one and done,
Right.
cannot be motivated by fear the way those guys like Isaiah Thomas and Quinn Buckner were by Bob Knight in the 70s and 80s. It's a different animal. So you have to change, and you have to alter and adapt. And he's done a lot of that. And I think that's what has always separated Mike in a lot of ways. You know, when he got involved with USA Basketball, and this is one of the things I know that chaps a lot of fans of other schools, but it's true. When Mike got involved with Jerry Colangelo and USA Basketball, it gave him an incredible recruiting advantage.
Oh,
an
yeah.
incredible recruiting advantage, because he's coaching, you know, Kyrie Irving, he's coaching LeBron, he's coaching, you know, name those great players that, you know, and he was on the staff. Remember, he was on Daly's staff. Lenny Wilkins and John Daly Daly was the head coach, but Lenny Wilkins and Mike Krzyzewski were the two assistants on the 92 Dream Team.
Mm-hmm.
So he's been connected with USA Basketball, you know, since 1992. Now that's an incredible advantage from a recruiting standpoint for him to have. And he milked it for all it was worth and got a lot out of it. He's very capable of adjusting and adapting to the times. Knight's not. Never was. And that's one of the reasons why it ended for him the way it ended. So, no, I wouldn't say that. And let me tell you also, off the floor, to give you an idea of how congenial he is. And this is a favor, and yeah, to some extent, I'm selfishly supporting him. In 2019, the final year that Raycom was going to do ACC basketball, and I'd been doing ACC basketball since 1985. His sports information man that really takes care of him is a gentleman by the name of John Jackson. I told John, you know, this is going to be my last Duke North Carolina game on February 20th. And, you know, I'd really like to bring my family. They've been watching me for years, you know, do the Duke North Carolina game. I've always done one Duke North Carolina game, the first one played, whether it was in Chapel Hill or at Cameron. And this particular year it was going to be with Mike Jiminski, and it would be the last one that we did there, because the ACC network was about to start up for ESPN the following season. That was also the last year I did the ACC tournament. So I said, I'd really like to bring my family. He said, Tim, not a problem. So that's, you know, six people.
Right.
So that's my wife, my two daughters, their husbands, and two babies at the time. We have two more now, but it was just six then. And they were young babies. I want to say Wilma Scarlett was maybe 2. Yeah, she was 2, and Spencer was probably a year and a half, maybe 18 months. Well, I thought they were just going to get in the building. I didn't know where they were going to be sitting. Mm-hmm. They were sitting next to Ken Griffey Jr. on the 5th row, mid-court. Okay? And Mike made that happen. So, wow. I mean, think about that. He says, you know, we're going to do something nice for you, Brando, because this may be the last time you ever come in here to do a game, and it probably will be the last time I come in there to do a game. So I'll forever be grateful for that. That's a bucket list item to me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is having your family sitting on the front row, basically.
Right.
You know, that's go to Broadway and see how many free tickets you can get to name that Broadway musical.
Right.
All of them put together wouldn't be worth what that ticket was worth that night.
Right.
I mean, they were scalping tickets outside for like, you know, $2,500 a pop, you know, out there. And I got 6 freebies on the 5th row. And Mike understands, and he's really great. A lot like Saban, actually, in the sense that he understands what we as broadcasters have to do to present both sides of the story. And if he respects you, he's going to really be good to you. And we had a great amount of respect for one another. And as a result, he did that favor for my family for my last Duke North Carolina game. So I may be a little bit biased when it comes to Coach K.
Hey, I'm going to follow that up with a very quick question. What's your favorite Bobby Knight story?
Oh, well, it involves me, of course. I'm doing Big Monday, 1987, and Roy Marble and the Iowa Hawkeyes are coming in to play. And the week before, Michigan had played Indiana at Michigan. And it was a great game, and Bill Frieder's team pulled it out late. And I was telling a story that involved Coach Knight that I had read that had been reported. I want to say it was in the Detroit Free Press. It was a story involving Coach Knight, and there was a quote from him in the paper, in the Detroit Free Press. And I'm working with Vitale, and so I tell this story, and then Dick jumps on it, and he begins to expand the story and tell, and you know how Dick is when he begins to expand on a story, it maybe goes, one possession. I'm like, oh, there's a bucket. Dick's still talking about the story. There's another bucket. That can happen when you're working with Dickie V. So the next week, I'm going in there. It's Iowa playing Indiana. And I called the sports information guy, Kit Klingelhofer. I'll never forget that name, Klingelhofer. And I called him. I said, is practice open for us to come in? His practices were never open to the quote-unquote press. But for the broadcasters, generally Knight would open them, his practices. So Dick was going to get in late, but I wanted to come in and see practice. And so I called the SID, said, yeah, it's open. Well, if you've ever been in Assembly Hall, it's like a big barn. It's even more so than some of the barns that you think of in the SEC. It's
Right.
really a big barn. And when you open the door at one end, it's a really big door that almost looks like a piece of the wall, and it's opening up. And no one else was in there. But as I'm walking through the door, Knight from the other end just goes, Brando, you blankety blank, no good, mother blankety blank, 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 get the blank out of here. I have no idea what he's talking about. And I said, what did you say? You want to repeat that? It's like, I'm not one of your players. I know you're trying to impress your players, but I'm not one of your players.
Right.
But I will tell you, I'm 31 years old. It's a big game. The Big Ten's a pretty big property for us at ESPN at the time. And, I don't want to, there's a lot of things going on in my head as he's doing this. And I had met him before. We had a good relationship. He's been charming. But he's really laying me out. And now he's coming towards me, and he's pointing, and he's fuming, saliva coming from his mouth. And I told you to get the blank out, so you get the blank out. I don't give a blank what he said. You're not welcome here, and I don't need to tell you why. If you want me to tell you why, I will later. Are you staying at that horse blank hotel blank blank? Yeah. And he said, so get the blank out now. And I'm never going to cower to anyone. Okay. I will always carry myself with my chest out and my head held high. And he was trying to embarrass me just as he would try to embarrass one of his players. So I just yelled back at him. I said, well, it doesn't mean a blanking thing for me to have to leave your blanking practice because you run the same blank every blank game anyway. And I go back to the hotel in Bloomington, and Vitale is just checking in. at the hotel, and I'm steaming. I mean, I'm shaking. And remember, I'm still a young guy. This was my first full season living in Connecticut, and getting to do the games and hosting game day was a big deal to me. And Mike Patrick would normally work with Vitale on the main games, and Mike was still doing some NFL at this point in the season. So for me to be replacing Mike meant that I was working with our A team. So there was part of me that was worried, but I didn't want Mike to know that. But when I got back to the hotel, I was really pissed off. And Dick, sensing that, but also, God bless Vitale, but he would never shut up about, he's the general, he's the greatest ever. And I said, well, let me tell you about your blank in general. Okay? Don't you tell that. When you talk to him, your Hall of Fame general, you tell him that I will be fair and I will be objective tomorrow, but not because I want to be. Okay? Not because I want to be, but because I'm supposed to be. Right? You just tell him that. And Vitale was like, well, he's just testing you, baby. He does it to everybody. You watch tomorrow. He'll come up. He'll give you a hug, probably squeeze your neck. I said, I don't give a blank what he does. Okay. This was the same year he and Dale Brown had their thing at the NCAA tournament.
Yeah.
So take you back in time.
Yeah.
When he slammed the fist.
Yeah.
Cincinnati and the phone went same year. So the next night, in those days where you're setting up to do your on camera before the game, you're out on the court. They were shooting down. You actually stepped up on a couple of risers to get to your broadcast position at Indiana.
Right.
So the team had to come right behind us as they came out onto the floor as we were opening the show. Literally, I'm talking to Dick, and you see Knight walk right behind us. And as he comes behind us, he's got, how he rolled up the program? He rolled up the program, hit me on the butt with the program, and then gave me one of these over my shoulder, like hugged me. Okay? So we get through with the open. It was quick. It was fleeting, but he did it. As soon as we went off, Vitale, I told you, I'll be giving you some love. He was sucking up to Timmy B. It was a Jekyll and Hyde. It was just, Bob was a Jekyll and Hyde. And I got to tell you, in the years following, my relationship with him only got better. He found out that I was a protege of Kurt Gowdy. He was a big hunter and fisherman, and had taken Bob and Ted Williams. Ted Williams was Bob Knight's hero. And Kurt Gowdy took him on an American Sportsman show out on to the Snake River and took Knight with him. And Bob and I talked about that. And I talked to him about my meeting Gowdy at the 82 Final Four. And so for years, and certainly during the time that he was at Texas Tech even, I had him in the NCAA tournament. When we had meetings, it was for dinner or for coffee in the morning. I mean, we did it and also had social occasions around the meetings. So, you wouldn't meet a more charming individual when he wanted to be charming. But at certain moments, and particularly around the game itself and his team, he could become maniacal and just a complete departure from the guy that you had seen maybe, just a couple of hours earlier. So, but that was one of those moments. That, by the way, will be one that's in the book. That one will be in my book for sure.
Well, let's go on ahead real quick and talk about another surprise team, in my opinion, from this past tournament. Are you surprised at how deep Alabama went in the tournament and how quickly Nate Oates has turned that program around there in Tuscaloosa?
No, Stephen, I knew about him from the time that he spent in Buffalo. Danny White's a friend of mine, and that's Michael White's brother. He had been in Buffalo before. He went to UCF, and now, of course, he's the new AD at Tennessee.
Right.
great hire, just a great hire. Tough guy, understands the game big time. He's a lot like Mick Cronin, really, in terms of the way he teaches the game. Defensive principles first, win with that, and then give some freedom on offense. Defense hard, but then free them up on offense.
Right.
And he's using really analytics with that. He believes in the three, and he doesn't care how many you miss, because if you can turn it into a possessions game, then the more possessions you get, the more threes you take, the better your chances are of winning the game against the opposing team if they're taking twos and missing twos. And defensively, his guys are just junkyard dogs. That's the only thing he really requires. And if you go back and think about some of the great teams that Wimp Sanderson had at Alabama, he always had some junkyard dog types. Latrell Sprewell comes to mind. I mean, I don't know if there was a better on-ball defender that I ever saw until I saw Latrell Sprewell playing for Wimp. And, he was on that team with, Robert Ory, and, when they had all those great forwards that were playing at Alabama. Seemingly they had, from the time they had Bobby Lee hurt on, Alabama always had great, it was almost power forward U there for a while in college basketball. But Latrell was a two guard that could just wreak havoc. If he wasn't getting turnovers, he was getting deflections. And Alabama had that this year, and they had a great collection of older guys to go with younger guys and transfers to make it work. I think the real test will be, keeping that culture going with the newer players that come in. It was easy to get guys like Herb, to get Jones and guys like that to play in, because this was it for them, and they wanted to maximize what they had. I think we also have to give a little bit of credit, to the preceding coach. The cupboard was not bare. He inherited a pretty good team. Avery Johnson did a really nice job of getting players in there. And to Oates' credit, he embraced what Avery did. So it was a great mix, a good blend. And if he can maintain that culture moving forward, I think Alabama's going to be around for a long time in hoops.
Well, my last question about college basketball for you is this, because everybody has a debate about this. Okay, Gonzaga came so close this year, and then a couple of years ago, Kentucky went close as well. Do you ever think in the culture of college basketball that we will ever see an undefeated team win a championship?
It's going to be hard. I mean, it's really going to be hard to pull off, because the weight of being undefeated is really something that you cannot understand until you go through it. Every athlete I've ever talked to that was in the midst of a undefeated run has never admitted it at the time, but when it was over, always said, I really was feeling it. The moment it ended, they was it was in our head. I mean, we were fighting it. I thought really that, Baylor, by example, all right, was a team that could have easily been undefeated as well. But they had the long COVID break, and when they came back from COVID, they weren't right. They had to. You have a long layoff from COVID, and then trying to regain your team's chemistry is not easy when you're playing in a league as good as the Big 12. It's not like Gonzaga didn't have some of those breaks with COVID. They did, but to the extent that Baylor did, they didn't experience that.
Right.
Baylor been undefeated to go along with it might have leveled things out just a little bit. Who knows? I do think that they had, from a massive standpoint, the better athletes at Baylor. I think you could tell. Now, let's not forget that UCLA dug into their legs quite a bit in that overtime game, and that's just part of tournament basketball. Okay? In the history of the NCAA tournament, how many times have we seen games where we said, that game right there, that was on Saturday, right? That game right there, that's the one for the national championship, right? Houston and And Phi Slamma Jamma against Louisville in 1983 was an epic racehorse basketball game, the likes of which we thought we had never seen in many, many years. But it was that other game between Georgia and NC State that produced the national champion.
Right.
That so-called other game. Who has an easier path in terms of expending energy on Saturday can really play a big role in money, especially if the game is late. And the UCLA game was later.
Right.
That was the second game play. And when you see a shot like that go down and you win it the way they want it, I mean, of course, mentally and physically, they had to take a breath. I mean, how do you not take a breath after a game like that? So I think that figured into the equation in terms of the level of the blowout. I think Baylor would have won the game no matter what. I think that from a matchup standpoint, they were just too good. Those guards were just incredible. And that kid, Vitale, that had 8 offensive rebounds and looked like a modern-day John Pannone. He reminded me of that big kid that played for Rolly Massimino in the 80s. Or Dave Corzine that played at DePaul. Mm-hmm. I'm going way back. You may not remember him, Stingray, but look him up. These are big, big guys. Those figure into the equation. But to your point about being undefeated, it's much harder now because they're playing so many more games.
Right.
There are so many more issues, it seems, that they're dealing with. And so, for instance, if we'd had social media in 1976, okay, for Quinn Buckner and Tom Abernathy and Kent Benson and all those guys playing at Indiana, they would have been hearing about it more.
Oh, yeah.
These days, you could insulate a team and keep the noise away from them. Being undefeated in college basketball means, 30, 31, 32 games. We're not talking about being 9-0 going to the LSU Alabama game at the end of an SEC season. It's different. That's a different kind of undefeated. So,
right.
It'll be very hard for a team to ever do that again. Right. It may be done, but it'll be very, very difficult for it to be done.
0.4 left. Now Mark Godfrey's really upset. He's got a right to be. Bowers was late getting on the line, and he had to give the ball up to Shelton. That was a distraction. That was not good. But this could be for the game. Time winding down. Bowers trying to do it himself. A leader. Got it! 1.2 left. We're tied at 75. At the buzzer, Joe, they're going to remember what happened at the free throw line. A very smart play. Rick Crawford has the ball. Let's get rid of my audio here. Now you see he's got the ball. Tim Bowers comes in late, and then Rick Crawford asks for it back. That's not good. You see Shelton did not want to give the ball up. Exactly. That's a distraction.
And Rick Crawford had the authority to do just that, but with a 1-on-1 situation, Shelton was not able to convert. And at the other end, with the shot clock running down, who's going to take the last shot? Your All-American candidate guard, Timmy Bowers, the leader, brings this game to overtime.
Our last basketball question is one I mentioned before we brought you on, Tim. That great Alabama-Mississippi State game that you called, I want to say it was 04, and Alabama's getting ready to shoot free throws. And if I'm not mistaken, the referee gave the ball to the shooter at the free throw line. Mississippi State player came in, held his hands up, asking to get in, and it was a distraction. It was. It absolutely. But you called it out right from the get-go. But you were very passionate about that. What was going through your mind at that time?
Well, the official can't take the ball back. I mean, that's just a no-no. I mean, you cannot do that.
Right.
Bowers just played the official and won. And that's exactly what happened. He just stepped in there, was like, and then the official asked for the ball back. I'm trying to remember, who was at the line? Was it Petway? Who was at the line?
I think it was Petway.
I think it may have been Antoine Petway. And I could just see that it annoyed Petway. It wasn't that Petway choked. I don't believe Petway choked. Okay, that kid does not choke. That he's not built that way. All right, but it pissed him off.
Yeah.
and it angered him just enough to get into his kitchen, and it affected the free throw. I don't think there's any doubt about it. And but a savvy move. I don't blame Bowers for doing it. I mean, veteran player trying to do something that Mississippi State hadn't done, trying to make history. The other thing I remember about that game was that was Mark Gottfried's team that was number 1 in the country at one point earlier in the year and had struggled some, but really got strong and was playing better towards the end of the year, and of course went on to the Elite Eight. That was as far, and still is as far, as Alabama has ever gone in the NCAA tournament. Lost to the eventual champion Connecticut in the regional final in the West region. Mm-hmm. So that was a hell of an Alabama team that Mississippi State beat. And the Roberts kid, Josh Roberts, was a great player, inside out combo player that was on that team. I think that's Robin Roberts' nephew. Memory serves me.
Lawrence Roberts, yeah.
Yeah, Lawrence Roberts. Did I say Josh? I'm sorry. Josh is another power forward, played at St. John's. Sorry. I've always got an answer. Lawrence Roberts. But I thought that State team would go a long, long way too. It was all about what kind of matchups they got in the NCAAs. But memorable game. I think that same year we had also had a Petway buzzer beater against Florida on a steal and a layup. On CBS that year. The Mississippi State game was a Jefferson Pilot game. The Florida game that we had was a CBS game, and Petway won it on a steal and a layup earlier in the year to beat Billy Donovan's team. So it was a great game. The other thing I remember about it was, for years, the Coliseum, Coleman was one of those great places that people just wouldn't think of as being a great place for college basketball. But if you had the right game and the right juice in the building, like if Shaq came in there, or if Florida came in ranked in the top 10, or Kentucky, the place would be juiced. Mississippi State somehow got tickets. I don't know how they got them, but they got them. And they had that was the largest crowd for a road team that I had ever seen at Alabama. That wasn't Kentucky. Kentucky fans will go all over the place to see Kentucky play basketball because they couldn't get a seat at Rupp Arena.
Right.
But because Mississippi State is so close by, and the game meant so much.
Down, Bowers trying to do it himself. A leader. Got it! 1.2 left.
I almost felt like I was calling a home game for Mississippi State when they won it. It was very rare when you see, in a game of that magnitude, the road team win and the environment still juiced like it were, the home team had won.
Well, I noticed that you've got a ULM shirt on. So what are your thoughts about Terry Bowden being at the helm down there, my friend?
Yeah, well, the basketball coach there, Keith Richard, who played at Northeast Louisiana in the early 80s, got me this. So I'm still waiting on my Terry Bowden swag.
Right.
But I'm really happy about it. I went to Northeast in 1975. They were playing at the college division level in football. They were, from a basketball standpoint, a consistent NCAA basketball team under Lenny Fant, usually winning the Southland Conference. I think for 4 straight years they won the Southland and went to the NCAAs. Vitale and I got to do one of the conference championship games at my alma mater, and it was a real thrill. A lot of people were thinking that they would drop football, that it was that bad, because we don't have financially that program is clearly the one that spends the least to be Division I, and we don't have any leaders of Fortune 500 companies that are able to make those kinds of donations. A lot of people do what they can, and a few people I know, a handful of people that I know, have done as best they can to really help the program. Full cost of attendance, by example. Okay, very few teams at the Division I level are not adhering to full cost of attendance. One of them that's not is ULM. That's being cleared up now. But I think more than anything else, the school had to commit to being Division I to be able to get a guy like Terry Bowden. And they had made a run at him 3 or 4 years ago and had told him that there were certain restraints that they just couldn't pull the trigger on. And he ultimately said no, and he remained at Akron. And when he got out of Akron, and he got out because of an athletic director and presidential change, he took that program from nowhere in the MAC to a MAC conference championship game. So he's built programs before, and from the ashes. So he knows what he's doing. And you see the staff he's put together. It's a group of former great players at Clemson that were GAs for Dabo Swinney. He actually, when he was out of coaching after the situation at Akron, he used Tommy. He called his brother Tommy. He says, "Hey, I want to be like a consultant for Dabo." Well, Dabo had all of his consultants, so he said, "Well, I just want to come and I want to be a part of the program. It's not about. I just want to make a contribution." And Dabo says, "Well, you know what you could do is you could go to school and be a GA." So he went and applied for a master's in business. He's already got a law degree. Terry's got a law degree. So he applied to get a master's at Clemson so he could be the oldest graduate assistant. Terry's my age. He's 65 years old. He was a 63-year-old GA for Clemson and got to know these kids. And his thought was, what better way to get better than to see how these younger guys are doing it, how they go about it. And so he's brought 3 or 4 of the really best young GAs and guys that were that were former players at that. There are guys that are coaching at ULM right now that you'd swear still had eligibility if you looked out on the field during spring practice. So it's a really cool thing to see. And I'm really happy for ULM because for the first time in a long, long time, maybe since John David Crow from my generation, John David Crow brought Northeast Louisiana into the 20th century. Now we're looking to Terry Bowden to take ULM into the 21st century. And John David did it with his personality and being a former Heisman guy and one of Bears Junction boys, and all that. And that was in the time that I was there. And to see what Terry is able to do to rally the community, there's not enough of an alumni base in Monroe to fill up the stadium. But if you embrace the city and the community, and press the flesh a little bit, go out and speak to the Rotary Club, do those kinds of things, which he'll do. Terry is, he'll talk to the wall just like me. So I think he'll be able to go and get everyone pumped up. The buzz around ULM football is bigger and better than it's ever been in my lifetime. So we're very excited about his being there. And I think, it wasn't too long after he got the job, boom, Rich Rodriguez comes in to be his OC. Rich Rod, in so many ways, a lot like Jimbo Fisher. People forget this about Jimbo. Conventional wisdom, Saban guy, worked for Nick at LSU. Wait a minute. Jimbo Fisher was Terry Bowden's quarterback at what is now Sanford College when it was, when Bobby Bowden coached at what they called, I'm trying to think of the name of it. Was it Howard? No, it wasn't Howard. It was another. It had a different name in Birmingham before it was Sanford. I can't think of the name of it now. But
I thought it was Howard.
Might be Howard, yeah.
I think it was.
Yeah. There's a different Howard, obviously, in the MEAC,
right,
the other part of the country. But, yeah, Jimbo was Terry Bowden's first quarterback. And he's taught a lot of football through the years, and I think he'll do a great job. Excuse me. Having Rich Rodriguez there is a great selling point. From a recruiting standpoint, his kid is probably going to be, I'd say he's the leading candidate to be the quarterback. He was a 2-year player at Arizona, and not a bad player. Got talent. He's just short. He's not quite 6 feet. But he knows how to run this offense, and that'll give him a head start, I think. And he's got 2 full years of eligibility. So I expect that Rich Rod will stay for at least those 2 years, if not a little bit more. And a little bit like Terry, these guys are coaching for the fun of it. You know, and there's a couple of other veteran coaches that are there. One that formerly played at ULM that I think has a chance to be the heir apparent if Terry decides to walk away after 5 or 6 years. This is where Terry wants to end it, and he wants to do it with his boys, you know, with his guys. And the staff he's assembled is really, really strong. Much better than their pay grade, I'm sure. But they're there for the right reasons. Rich Rod's made a ton of money. Terry's made a ton of money. They're there because they want to be. And I think that's fantastic.
Tim, you mentioned Nick Saban a second ago and taking this back to Tuscaloosa, but staying with football. I heard an absolutely incredible – I can't remember if it was a show or a podcast or what it was, but I remember listened to it twice in a row about Bear Bryant Jr. and UAB, and I was so fascinated with that story. Can you share with us about Bear Bryant Jr. and UAB and that whole crazy scenario?
Well, we're dealing obviously with Coach Clark and the job that he's done. I mean, celebrated as a coach of the year and certainly deserves that. It was a story really no one would cover.
Right.
This was back when I was doing my own show. I suspect that's when you remember hearing the story, right? When I was doing my own radio show.
Yeah, it had to be.
Yeah. And because no one was covering. I want to say there was one writer in Birmingham that wrote about it. He was the guy that generally covered Auburn, not Alabama. Gosh, I wish I could remember his name, but off the top of my head I can't. But he wrote about it, and I actually called some of my friends there in Alabama, which I have many. I'm probably not as popular on Twitter with a lot of Alabamians. But I'm pretty popular when I'm outside the Twitter world with many Alabamians. So I called some of my friends and asked what was going on, and they told me this whole story about Bryant's son and his disdain for UAB. And I did remember I said, does this have anything to do with the Wimp Sanderson, Gene Bartow? They said, no. Wimp was just that was a whole different deal. Wimp was, I think, to some extent like, wait a minute, Bartow's had been at Memphis State, went to UCLA, now he's coming back, he's starting this program, and Wimp was like, hey, I'm trying to win SEC games. I can understand all that. I could. This was about making sure that a program was basically sabotaged, that we would hire guys that we knew probably wouldn't get the job done. They could keep their football program. They could play over at that eyesore stadium that hasn't been refurbished in forever, Legion Field, and just let the program die out. That was the story. That's the way it was told to me. And I said, well, why would you do that? And it was like, well, this UAB is dealing with the same board of governors as the University of Alabama. I had never heard of that. I've heard of, like, for instance, we have a Louisiana system of education that takes care of Louisiana Lafayette, Louisiana Monroe, Louisiana Tech, but LSU is outside that system. You have a different board. Okay. The University of Alabama and Bryant Jr. were in charge of okaying whatever UAB got or didn't get. And I was like, what? Are you kidding me?
Wow.
Well, Clark comes in as a hell of a year. I want to say, if memory serves me correctly, they were bowl eligible but couldn't get in a bowl. You remember that?
I do.
Yes.
Yeah. And Clark, who had done a great job and was really genuine, called Saban, and to Saban's credit, he took the call. Bryant Jr. would not take the call. He would not talk to the man. Okay. And he was the one pulling all the purse strings and everything. So Clark is on my radio show and he's telling me the story about how kind and generous Nick was, talking with him and giving him some time. But he says, is there any way you could get Paul Jr. to get in touch with me? And his response to this, these are his words, not mine. These are his words, Coach Clark. He said, I asked Nick, is there any way you can get him to get in touch with me? I just want to talk with Bryant Jr. And Nick says, there's some things even I can't get done. I was just amazed.
Wow.
My jaw hit the floor when I heard that. Now, this was, this is 2021 now, so this is a story from around 2011, 12. This was before they disbanded the program. Okay, this was before the program was disbanded and they brought them back.
Right.
But without all of that happening, if without all of that happening and the program being disbanded, what it actually did was it got the fan base of UAB, and a lot of those folks, as you guys well know, have money. They have plenty of money. We're talking about, one of the great medical schools in this country. And it got a lot of people that weren't involved in sports whatsoever to dig into their pockets and make donations. And it became a rallying point. And a young man that had been paralyzed, a young black player that had been paralyzed on the team, was sort of the whose name I can't recall either, but you can look it up. Timothy, I know his first name was Timothy because we had him on the show too. They came back. We did a story about it on Football Saturdays, my syndicated show that was out during the summertime. And when they announced that they were bringing the program back, our cameras were there with my show. And it was one of the great segments. We won an Emmy with that story.
Wow.
We won
Congratulations.
we won 4 Emmys with that show, and that story was one of them. But yeah, but that just kind of shows you the political angle. That don't ever say, I don't care what anybody says. Politics has always been a part of sports, and it's a part of sports every day of our lives. And at most institutions that are state run, the board of supervisors that whatever is done by any institution are appointed by the governor of the state. So it's inherently political to be involved in athletics at the collegiate level.
Well, Heath, that wraps up the part 1 of the interview there with the legendary Tim Brando. And Heath, what were your thoughts, first off, on the hilarious story that Tim Brando told about Bobby Knight and him coming to practice?
Well, Bobby Knight's one of my favorite coaches of all time. And, Coach K played under Bobby Knight, and I always have thought those guys were exactly the same guy. But for some reason, the media loves Coach K and always hated Bobby Knight. But, they both teach the same style. It's just funny to see. But, how crazy is it that Tim Brando talked about Coach K, who's in the Hall of Fame. He's talking about Roy Williams, who's in the Hall of Fame. Talking about Bobby Knight, who's in the Hall of Fame. And Timmy B is going to the Hall of Fame.
Yes, and actually that's going to be in the next edition of the Stingray Show. Tim Brando was nice enough to give us 2 hours of content, so we broke it up into 2 shows. We have part 1 today, and then on Tuesday, we are going to have part 2 with Tim Brando. Well, man, that's going to do it for this edition of the Stingray Show. We hope that you have enjoyed it. Tune in next Tuesday for part 2 of the Tim Brando interview right here only on the Stingray Show. And before we go, from all of us here at the Stingray Show, we hope you have a great weekend. And as always, God bless.
The Dogs and Stingray are coming for you! This is Stephen Ray, a.k.a. Stingray, coming to you live from Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Good afternoon, Mr. Feinbaum. Stingray here, and I'm about to shoot the bull with you like all the Auburn students do down at Auburn. Worst defense ever! So without further ado, here is the biggest. Alabama going for the field goal. The kick is up. It is away. It is no good. Chris Davis bringing it out of the end zone. Oh, he's got blockers. Chris Davis up the sideline. Here he goes. Here we go, guys. Dobbs back to pass. Launching the ball. Jennings, he's got it. Jennings, he's got it. Touchdown, Tennessee. They shocked the Dogs in Sanford Stadium. Are you kidding me? My God almighty. What an epic way for the Tennessee-Georgia